Tonight, American troops descend in Iraq after Iran is blamed for the violent attacks at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad.
Iran should want peace more than anybody.
This as the stalemate over the impeachment trial to remove the president hits political stagnation.
And
it simply isn't our time.
Another one bites the dust. The latest Democrat to drop out of the race for the White House.
Plus, weapons production fueling fears of a new arms race across the globe.
And a papal apology after the Bishop of Rome loses his temper.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The Pentagon chief warning the United States could take preemptive action after the attack in Baghdad. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. President Trump has ordered U.S. soldiers to Iraq after that violent attack. So what could happen next? The president has made it clear he does not want to go to war.
Also clear, even though the assault took place in Iraq, the real conflict is between the United States and Iran. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us the latest on the escalating clash.
Despite holding Iran accountable for the violent protests at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, President Trump has made it clear he doesn't want to go to war.
I don't think that would be a good idea for Iran. It wouldn't last very long. Do I want to? No. I want to have peace. I like peace. And Iran should want peace more than anybody.
Iran denies it's behind the trouble. Protests erupted at the embassy after the U.S. carried out military strikes Sunday on 5 targets of a militia in Iraq and Syria backed by Iran. The U.S. blamed the militia for launching a rocket attack that killed an American contractor on a military compound in Iraq 2 days earlier. It was just the latest in a series of strikes by this militia.
So this group has carried out, according to the U.S., around 10, 11 rocket attacks in the last 6 months.
But this time, the U.S. struck back. And author and Middle East expert Seth Frantzman said the American response was a game changer.
It definitely is the first time, as far as I recall, that the Americans actually responded against these militias, despite the fact that hundreds of American soldiers have been killed and wounded by these groups over the years. In the past, the United States was worried about tangling with Iran. And I think finally they are willing to respond to this kind of harassment.
Israel condemned the violence at the U.S. Embassy, one of America's largest and most heavily guarded diplomatic missions in the world. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu commended the U.S. on its actions against Iran and its proxies in the region.
It does put them on the same side of Israel, and I think from Israel's perspective, they're very happy to see the United States kind of wake up to the threat.
Israel itself knows it could be headed for battles with Iran. Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Avi Kochavi said last week Israel is preparing for what he called a limited confrontation with Iran.
Israel wants to remove Iran from Syria and to not have them trafficking weapons in Iraq. The United States, of course, just doesn't want its soldiers being attacked. So Israel and America, of course, they're allies and have the same view, but they have slightly different long-term agendas.
The violence in Iraq comes as Iran and its allies have faced unprecedented mass protests in recent months, as President Trump's heavy sanctions have damaged Iran's economy.
Iran has been trying to push the Americans ever since the U.S. left the Iran deal, but also, since the 1980s with the hostage crisis. Iran wants America out of the Middle East. It calls the United States the Great Satan. It says that it's resisting. It would like to destroy Israel and the United States eventually in the long term.
The U.S. maintains around 5,000 troops in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government in order to fight ISIS. Frantzman says a series of attacks against the U.S. is meant to test America's limits.
And we've seen this in the Gulf also. They attacked 6 oil tankers. They kidnapped a British oil tanker. They shot down a U.S. drone. That means they've attacked on land, air, and sea. This is a coordinated attack, and I think that Iran was waiting to see, okay, when will the Trump administration reply? And when they reply, that will give us an excuse to go even further.
For now, this round of violence is subsiding, but as pressure mounts inside Iran, it's likely to erupt again soon. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
To election 2020, Julian Castro is out of the race for the White House. The former housing secretary under President Obama and former mayor of San Antonio was the only Latino candidate in the group. And despite some of his progressive policies on things like immigration and fighting poverty, he didn't gain traction among Democrats. After failing to qualify for the last two debates and dragging in the polls for months, Castro told his supporters today this wasn't his time.
The official race for the White House kicks off a historic 2020, even as an impeachment trial still looms in the new year. The big question is when or even if the Senate will receive impeachment articles from the United States House. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now to break it all down. Ben, where do things stand now?
Well, John, at this point, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is hanging on to those articles of impeachment at the moment, and the holdup is she wants to see how the Senate plans to proceed with the trial rules. But President Trump says it's because Democrats don't have a case against him.
Mr. President, what's your message to North Korea?
President Trump kicked off the new year amid an impeachment showdown in Washington. He said he's ready and then took aim at House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
She hates the Republican Party. She hates all of the people that voted for me and the Republican Party.
He took the attack to Twitter, writing, "They produced no case, so now she doesn't want to go to the Senate. She's all lies." Pelosi pushed back in a letter to House Democrats, writing, "It now remains for the Senate to present the rules under which we will proceed." This was in response to news that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell pledged total coordination with the White House, a move some Republican lawmakers have criticized. Senator Lisa Murkowski said there should be distance between the White House and Senate over the impeachment proceedings. Senator Susan Collins also pushed back on McConnell's words.
It is inappropriate, in my judgment, for senators on either side of the aisle to prejudge the evidence.
This, as the president's lawyer said, he is willing to testify and would love to try the case.
I would testify, I would do demonstrations, I'd give lectures, I'd give summations, or I'd do what I do best, I'd try the case.
Now, a key question is, will the trial include witnesses? Democrats have been pushing to hear from White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and even former National Security Advisor John Bolton. McConnell needs to get 51 of the 53 Senate Republicans to vote his way, which would allow the GOP to control the process and call who they want. John, Jenna?
All right, Ben Kennedy at the White House, thank you. And here now for our Faith Nation political panel, Scott Thuman, Chief Political Correspondent with the Sinclair Broadcast Group, and David Brody, CBN's Chief Political Analyst. Both of you, good to have you. To you first, Scott. Julian Castro has announced that he is out. What does this do to the field? What does this mean for the other players?
Right. It's not a major surprise. He was struggling in the polls, just over 1%, wasn't fundraising very well, and he'd made it pretty public that he needed more cash to survive on the campaign trail. What it does is interesting because a lot of candidates, when they get out, you say it doesn't really do much to the race. It doesn't change the chemistry. It does a little bit in the fact that you've got the only Latino candidate who's now out. He brought diversity to the stage. He was progressive in many ways. He challenged the other candidates. For example, when he was asked about whether or not you should decriminalize border crossings, he was right away pushing that. And it forced other candidates to make a stance one way or the other and go on record. So it does change things optically and also a little bit ideologically.
David, speaking of diversity, this was supposed to be the most diverse group of candidates we've ever seen. It seems like that is becoming less and less.
Yeah, you would think Democrats talk all about diversity, and Kamala Harris gone, now Julian Castro. I mean, in terms of affecting the race, I mean, he had, what, 1%, 2% or so, not even 2% at the end. So, you know, to go ahead and all the candidates can divide up as 1%, not going to really mean much. But yes, in terms of diversity, for sure, as Scott talked about, also geographic diversity, right? Texas and California, big states. Democrats obviously doing well in California, but are doing better in Texas. And no candidate at all from either one of those states right now.
So that leaves 14 Democrats, 3 Republicans. Scott, as you tweeted earlier today, people tend to forget that there are Republicans who are running against President Trump, Joe Walsh, and someone you recently interviewed, Bill Weld, former governor. He's a long shot candidate. Why is he running?
Sure. Well, look, they're in the same statistical problem that Julian Castro was. You're getting 1 to 2% if you're lucky some days, right? And of course, it's tough to compete against President Trump, who's taking him money hand over fist. Right. I mean, we'll talk about those figures in a bit. Huge cash flow and great support within his own party. But there are Republican challengers, the two you mentioned. Governor Bill Weld's an interesting case because here's a guy who was a Republican and a successful governor in Massachusetts, which is a challenge in itself as a Republican. He then becomes an Obama supporter and endorser. He then becomes a libertarian, was actually on the presidential ticket in 2016. People forget that. He was the VP under Gary Johnson. And they still got, what, about 6 million votes? Not too shabby, I guess. And now he's back to being a Republican and trying to challenge Trump. And it's because he says, look, this guy's an isolationist. He's not responsible when it comes to spending. I cut taxes 21 times as a governor. He just believes that he represents the old guard of the Republican Party, not the one that's under President Trump. He believes he can challenge him. He knows it's a long shot, but he wants to make a statement.
Scott, you touched on it. President Trump, he had an amazing fourth quarter, $46 million. The leading Democrat came in at 34.5. That's Bernie Sanders. How much of a factor do you think is impeachment when it comes to fundraising for the Trump campaign?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked because we had a meeting with a lot of higher-ups in the Trump campaign just 2 weeks ago, and a lot of it was background, some of it on the record. But really what they showed us is that they are fundraising very well off of impeachment. They see that this is an avenue to bring in more cash because people are more upset, more riled up, believe that it's going to be more divisive, and they feel like their guy, their candidate, in this case, President Trump, is under attack. So they're kind of rallying around it. Now, Brad Parscale, who's running that show and that campaign, told me, look, we don't want this to go on forever, though. We're not a fan of the impeachment, but as long as it's happening, we have to find a way to galvanize around it. They have no problems with money, with volunteers, with resources. It's an impressive setup, and I've watched, and David, you have too, you've watched these campaigns as they kind of form and burgeon. This one, it's shocking how much they've grown from 2016 till now, and so that money comes in handy. It sure does.
Well, in terms of impressive, Bernie Sanders' haul of $34 million, very impressive. And I got to tell you, I mean, Bernie's got some money, a lot of money. He's got obviously the energy of the party, the liberal base. He's got the big endorsements, the AOCs of the world. And can I do an imitation? I do analysis a lot, but let me do it. This is an imitation of the folks at the Democratic National Committee right now. Please no, not Bernie, because that's the deal.
You're right about that.
I mean, look, it's starting to go, oh my goodness. Are we back to 2016 again? He could win.
Well, and David, look at the incline. He's gone from 18 million the first quarter to 25 to 25 to now 34 and a half. That's right. That's significant. Yeah. And the number one occupation listed for donors was teacher. He's still getting those small dollar figures, and he's still saying that the other guys, the Buttigieg and the Bidens, they're taking corporate cash. We're not going to do it. We won't be holding to anyone. They can stick with that motto. How long it stays, how far it gets them, undetermined.
Well, Scott Thuman, chief political correspondent for the Sinclair Podcast Group. David Brody, chief political analyst for CBN News. Thank you both for being with us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, John.
When we come back, why a major nuclear and high-tech weapons advances are fueling concerns of a new global arms race. That story next.
Introducing the CBN Bible from CBN.com. Now, an easier way to study the Bible and grow in your faith. Highlight your favorite verse. Read separate versions at a glance. Click and read a commentary. Or cross-reference your favorite verse using the Strong's Concordance. All the right tools to study the Bible, all in one place. The CBN Bible, available at cbn.com/Bible or the iTunes App Store.
This is CBN Newswatch. Thanks for joining us. Watch breaking news, exclusive stories and programs, credible news reporting.
We show you what's happening in the world and how you can pray about it.
This is CBN Newswatch, because truth matters. Weekdays at 5 on the CBN News Channel.
Yes, right on time.
From Superbook.
Pepper's Pizza Palace is donating pizza for everyone today. Wait. I have big plans today.
Trust in God even when times are tough. He has a plan for your life.
Hey, we're going to be late for the grand opening. My parents want me to help with this outreach thing, feeding the community. What am I supposed to do here? Superbook!
Join the Superbook Club and get Superbook The Birth of Moses, plus 2 copies to share with others, all for your gift of only $25.
Pharaoh ordered all newborn Hebrew boys thrown into the Nile River, and I have a 3-month-old brother.
The Birth of Moses. Yours for a gift of only $25.
What will you do the next time the soldiers come? I do not know, but I trust God has a plan for all of us.
Superbook Club members' free streaming for seasons 1, 2, and 3 is now available.
Jenna, a lot going on in the world today. North Korea is threatening to unveil a new strategic weapon. Russia has unveiled a new hypersonic missile, and China is working on one as well.
Now, the global buildup is raising concerns about the possibility of a new international arms race. When asked about Kim Jong-un's latest threat, though, President Trump played it down. North Korea has issued another threat toward the U.S., Kim Jong-un promising to reveal a new strategic weapon. President Trump, though, is playing it down.
Look, he likes me, I like him, we get along. He's representing his country, I'm representing my country. We have to do what we have to do.
Kim also teasing the possibility of breaking his country's self-imposed ban on testing nuclear weapons and intercontinental missiles. Both North and South Korea, along with the U.S., are locked in ongoing negotiations over denuclearization. South Korea's unification minister saying if the North unveils a new weapon, South Korea will abandon talks for peace on the Korean peninsula. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he hopes it doesn't come to that.
We're hopeful that the Chairman Kim will make the right decision. He'll choose peace and prosperity over conflict and war.
Kim's threat comes just a few days after Russia announced its new hypersonic weapon is operational and ready for war. It can travel 27 times the speed of sound. NATO's Secretary General has voiced his concerns.
As long as we are strong, united and firm, then of course we can also engage in dialogue with Russia, including on arms control. We must avoid a new arms race. That's expensive, it's dangerous.
Right now, Russia is the only country with a weapon, but China is also developing something similar, and the U.S. is working on one too.
The economic rise of China provides great economic opportunities. It has lifted millions of people out of poverty, but at the same time we see that China invests heavily in new modern capabilities. A few weeks ago they deployed a new intercontinental ballistic missile able to reach Europe and North America.
It all points to growing concerns of a new worldwide arms race and the very real possibility that a future military conflict could be devastating. And more on the story on CBNnews.com.
Coming up, how a new film set to hit theaters next week is about to shed light on death row.
When I came to Regent University, it's like the world opened up. I felt like I needed to advance my career and go back to school. Regent was a perfect fit for me. The Regent professors are world class. You are equipped. The focus of the faculty is on each individual student, whether it's online or in person. You become a part of Regent's family. You carry with you not just the content and the knowledge, but the confidence to understand that we can be significant in the world.
Regent University. Follow your path.
Nigerian Christians
in Iran are routinely arrested.
Catholic Christians continue to suffer.
In times of trial and affliction, you need to know the truth.
One of the fastest growing Christian populations in the world.
Join Wendy Griffith and George Thomas for Christian World News.
Young people are the ones who are open to the gospel.
Powerful stories of suffering and hope that affect all Christians. Watch Christian World News, Saturday at 5 p.m.
Get Protect Your Sleep and discover how to improve the quality of your life. A free DVD or booklet from the Christian Broadcasting Network.
If you're not a great sleeper, you can do things to make yourself a great sleeper. If you're already a pretty good sleeper, you can enhance your sleep and be even better.
5 leading experts help remove the obstacles between you and restorative sleep.
When you don't get a restful night's sleep, you wake up with an accumulation of stress.
Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to CBN.com to get your free DVD or booklet today.
Everything you do better with a good night's sleep.
You'll discover how food affects your sleep, how to put insomnia to rest, explore effective remedies for sleep apnea, and much more in Protect Your Sleep. Wake up to your best life and get Protect Your Sleep today. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to CBN.com to get your free DVD or booklet.
The story of a wrongfully accused man sentenced to death is coming to life on the big screen.
It's not just a dramatic film. Just Mercy is the powerful true-life story of a Harvard lawyer who travels to Alabama to defend an innocent man on death row. Starring Michael B. Jordan, Oscar winners Jamie Foxx and Brie Larson, the new Warner Brothers film brings to light the plight of inmates on death row. Just Mercy is set to hit theaters nationwide January 10th. Last month, we spoke with Hannah Cox, an advocate working to shed light on major issues within the criminal justice system.
And joining us now is Hannah Cox of Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. Hannah, thanks for joining us. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, tell us about this new film, Just Mercy.
So I just got to see it the other night for a premiere before it came out, and it was absolutely fantastic. You know, working in my organization, I'm very well informed about how often we have innocence issues within the system, how hard it is to prove those innocence issues even when you have substantial evidence. But this film really portrayed that so well and dug into a case that really wasn't that long ago. It was in the 1990s in Alabama, and I thought it did an excellent job of really painting that picture for people who maybe aren't as close to the justice system as I am.
Hannah, for people who aren't as familiar with your group, the name of your group may sound like a contradiction in terms for them. So aren't there times, though, when capital punishment does seem warranted or seem to be called for, especially for the most heinous crimes, let's say the murder of children?
I think that we could probably all agree there's certain crimes that most people would agree are the worst of the worst. But if you start digging into the death penalty system, the problem that I find is that those aren't typically the crimes you find on death row. I think most people would be really shocked at who gets the death penalty and why. We actually see that the county where the crime was committed is the leading cause of whether or not someone gets capital punishment. Only 2% of counties are bringing the majority of death penalty sentences. The second leading factor is whether or not someone can afford a good attorney. If you can afford a good attorney, you're probably not going to end up on death row. And so we've got a system that's very biased. We have a system that, again, gets it wrong all the time. We've had one person exonerated for every 10 executions in this country. And so for conservatives and Christians like me, those are unacceptable factors. And I think that we could probably have a debate all day long about whether or not the death penalty is theoretically okay. But the fact is it's not operating in a manner in practice that I think we can stand behind.
So the Supreme Court is leaving in place a lower court ruling blocking federal judges. All of this, Hannah, after the Trump administration made a lot of waves by saying those executions would be resumed. Where do things stand now?
So we're currently at a stay. The Supreme Court has upheld that stay. Obviously, there's a lot of people on the other side that are still working to overturn that and move forward with the executions. But the reality is this push by the Justice Department is really kind of coming out as an outlier. We've seen the death penalty consistently go down in usage over the past 16 years, which is the last time we had a federal execution. A lot's changed during that time. The companies don't want their drugs used in this manner. They see that as something that will hurt their business or something that they see as unethical. So they're having difficulty obtaining a way to actually carry out the death penalty. And I think that that's why you see so many states that aren't using it anymore. We're down to only 25 states that still have it. Of those, over a third haven't used it in over a decade or more. Last year, we saw only 8 states use it at all, and over half the executions were coming from Texas alone.
Hannah, there are efforts across the country to repeal the death penalty. How are faith-inspired conservative Republicans engaged in those efforts?
They're leading them, to be honest. We had 11 states this year alone that had Republican, Christian-sponsored pieces of legislation to repeal the death penalty. One of those was successful in New Hampshire, where we did overturn it with significant bipartisan support and even overrode a governor's veto. Wow. In Wyoming, which is a very red conservative state, we fell only a handful of votes short of passing it. Passed through the House and just almost barely didn't make it out of the Senate. So it'll be back next year as well. We expect to see the same thing happen in Colorado, Utah, another very religious state, and Ohio has a very strong Catholic and Baptist presence. We're seeing tremendous gains made there. We've had a lot of their Republican leadership speaking out about the problems around the system. And so I think that not only are Christians and conservatives getting behind this, but they're really championing it.
And what is resonating? What's the motivating factor for some of these different groups, whether it's the Baptists or Catholics, to come around this issue?
I don't know if there's any single one factor. I do think the innocence issues are probably the leading factor for most people, where if you are someone who values life and who values protecting the sanctity of human life, like we profess to in both Christianity and conservative circles, the numbers of innocence in the system are just unacceptable. But I also think that people are just recognizing that this is a failed big government program. It's got a lot of error, a lot of corruption, a lot of bias. It's not operating in a manner that's consistent with our principles. And I think as people are increasingly learning more and more about all of its flaws, they're turning against it.
So a new Gallup poll shows a majority of Americans actually support life without parole over the death penalty. Hannah, why this trend? Why do we see this?
Well, we've seen that trend happening for some time, even if it hasn't showed up in polls. We didn't always have life in prison without parole for many states up until the late 90s, early 2000s. Since that time period, once states began implementing that, we've seen juries consistently pick that over death. The new death sentences have been down 60% since 2000. I think the reason is that juries oftentimes would vote for the death penalty when they thought someone might be ongoingly violent and didn't feel like they had another way to ensure society would be protected from that person. With life in prison without parole, they have an option where they know this person will not be back out in society. They know that the threat will be nullified, and therefore they feel like they have a better option that doesn't require them to participate in taking another human's life.
All right, Hannah Cox with Conservatives concerned about the death penalty. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Coming up, an apology from the Pope and why it's not what you might think.
Christians around the world are standing with the Israelis. But why? In CBN's free magazine, Friends of Israel, you'll discover why Christians are supporting the Jewish state, how Israel is fulfilling prophecy as a light to the nations, and ways you can pray for the people of Israel. Israel needs the support of friends like you. Call now or go to cbn.com to get your free copy of Friends of Israel.
Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the work of your Spirit, Lord God, with this movement of getting the Bible,
yes,
Lord, into public schools.
Watch The Prayer Link, Tuesday nights at 6:30.
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Protect your sleep and live your best life with innovative information from 5 leading sleep experts.
If you're not a great sleeper, you can do things to make yourself a great sleeper. If you're already a pretty good sleeper, you can enhance your sleep and be even better.
Discover a sleep-enhancing bedtime routine, how to put insomnia to rest, learn how to relieve pain that disturbs sleep, and much more in Protect Your Sleep.
Everything you do better with a good night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Don't miss out on this brand new series.
And finally tonight, Pope Francis rang in the new year with a message of peace and contrition.
Yeah, that apology came after the 83-year-old pontiff freed himself from the hands of an overzealous pilgrim on New Year's Eve. Yeah, the Pope not happy. Ultimately, neither the pontiff nor the pilgrim were harmed. Nevertheless, Pope Francis addressed it in a speech the following day, saying he set a bad example, and that despite the patience of love, we sometimes lose that patience. Beyond saying sorry, his speech focused on violence against women and hope for a world of peace.
I guess the good example is setting the bar high for asking for forgiveness.
Yeah, nobody's perfect.
That's right.
So, well, that's going to do it for Faith Nation.
Have a great night. We'll see you back tomorrow.